I'd like to introduce you to Ronald Wright. Ronald is an author and CBC Massey lecturer. And Ronald, you would like to share your remarks about outside pressures.
I was thinking, the question I have for myself is, what's the broader context of this? What are these pressures that impinge on us that caused the province back in 1974 to set up this unique federation of islands with its unique system of division of powers in order to preserve them, and which would now return in force if we were to adopt same system of government that just about everywhere else in Canada has. And in that broad context, just consider this. In my lifetime, since the end of World War II, the world's population and Canada's population, roughly the same, have both increased 3 times. And since my grandfather moved to BC as a settler in 1908, the world's population and Canada's population has increased 5 times. And then you've got to consider the consumption by each individual person that adds up to the environmental impact and also the impact of things like automobiles and other machines. And that runs as it's very hard to quantify, but something like 10 times the simple population increase numbers. So there's been this enormous assault on the natural world. I mean, since 1970, the world's population has doubled and the world's wild animal populations have halved. Those two things are intimately related. I've seen one lovely place after another destroyed in my lifetime by overdevelopment. I'll just give one example, a long way from here, but in some ways similar. The Mexican seaside resort of Cancun. When I first went there in 1970, it was much smaller than Ganges. There was nobody living there except a few Maya fisher folk, the Maya indigenous people of the area who lived mainly by fishing. Then along came developers, Mexican developers, and they persuaded the Mexican government to allow very tasteful, very green pilot project. All the hotels would be designed by architects. It would be the only town in Mexico where you could drink the water from the taps, and so forth. By 1975, 15 years later, this little village had 30,000 people. It now has almost 1 million people, and it has exactly the same problems of any other big city. So I'm voting no because I have lived in a number of municipalities. I mean, there's this broader context, but also my own personal experience living in various municipalities of roughly the same size as Salt Spring in different parts of Canada. And I've seen what happens unless there is a unique, strong protection against the ever-rising tide of pressure from outside. We in North America, because those of us who've come from other places, which is most of us, because our ancestors were building this country by immigration, always thought that more population and more impact was something to celebrate. A lot of towns in Ontario still have their population totals ratcheted up as you drive into the town and say, "Welcome to Port Hope." 10,000 people, and then a year later, it's 11,000 people. It's just sort of ratcheted up like the number of Big Macs served. And it was in Port Hope. I won't go into it because it's too long a story, but it had managed to avoid growing much for about 100 years. It was the last well-preserved Victorian town near Toronto. The developers were very patient. They waited until some zoning and land use changes were made, and they waited until they had one bad council, which, as David pointed out, means 4 rather than 7. 4 out of 7 is all it takes. They got the one bad council who was prepared to allow them to double the size of the town without putting in any community amenities whatsoever, not even a schoolyard, not even a park or a trail. And Port Hope was changed forever by that one bad council, and that's what eventually, sooner or later, would happen here. So By uniting in a federation of islands, we have the power to stand up to the power of developers. And the developer, in this case, their main tool was not simply the inducement of tax money, it was the threat of very costly legal action. And they were going to drag the town through the courts for years and ratchet up bills in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.